Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our afternoon session on how standards build trust. I hope you enjoyed the awards. I must say it's one of the highlights of my year is seeing the excitement on people's faces, because really saying thank you and acknowledging the work that users and makers have put in to receiving the value and the benefits of international standards, because that's our game, is really fantastic. So when I think about across the sort of 1,200 committees that we oversee in all those sectors, we talked about ISO and IEC, but also David has been helping massively in the ITU. Delighted this year that the UK regained its seat on the ITU Council after over 20 years. So now we are uniquely positioned, actually, I think, of any country in the world to be represented and influential at the very top table in ISO, IEC and the ITU, the whole of the international standards system. So this afternoon we're going to talk in more detail about trust, and you will be invited in a few minutes to move downstairs into our workshop rooms, and you will work through different standards and talk about that in more detail, and David will explain the arrangements for that. I just wanted to say a few words by way of introduction to this topic, which is so absolutely fundamental in a world where trust seems in very short supply. I mentioned earlier that we are really in very difficult times, and all of us know that and feel it, whether you're concerned about climate change or the war in Ukraine and Russian aggression or whatever. This is an extremely difficult and challenging time for the world, cost of living, energy crisis, and so on. So the one common currency that we have to build trust in our market structures is standards, what we use and what we make and what we disseminate. That is a very precious commodity, and I would say at the outset of the war in Ukraine, that Russian invasion early on, there was quite a lot of discussion in the board of ISO and in IEC board about what to do, and the answer was very firmly, we must remain apolitical in this whole conversation, because actually the minute you take a political decision in the world of international standards, you remove the trust that people can have in those hard-earned, hard-worked documents. We're here to serve government, consumers and industry, moving on from the early days of BSI, the Engineering Standards Committee, into BSI, the national standards body, representing UK interests, policy and strategy level in ISO, IEC, and of course in now supporting DCMS, Digital and Department of Culture, Media and Sport, in the ITUT. In the European context as well, we have just had our annual audit for BSI's membership of CEN and CENELEC, and that's been yet again labelled an exemplar of a national standards body. So we're very pleased to provide that access for our experts to participate in the European regional system, which is an integral part of the international system. So for a country like the UK, being able to sit not only at the top table, but to provide that platform for you to deliver your influence and make sure that the standards that we are all proceeding to adopt and use across our industry bring the trust that our consumer and public community and our government is looking for. So when I think across the piece, and during COVID we all had time to think a lot about this, I think about standards. Actually, do you know what? It's all about standards. It's all about standards, including regulation. It's about standards, including rules, regulations. The Minister actually mentioned that a little bit this morning on the video, if you heard it. He talked about codes and rules. It's all part of a framework within which we live our lives, we work, and our political masters act or don't act. So this rules-based framework builds the market structure, and you are the trusted people who are there to put your mark on what that looks like. And if we lose that trust in our work, then we will erode and fragment the markets on which we all depend, your families, your friends and colleagues, whether you're a consumer or industrialist or a civil servant. And I think about that as these three poles that kind of support the infrastructure. Minister also mentioned the national quality infrastructure, and we ought to acknowledge the excellent work that UCAS, who are here today through our former colleague Richard Collin representing UCAS, are a critical part of that. And our work with BSI as the standards body, alongside the NPL as the National Metrology Institute, UCAS as the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, and indeed the Intellectual Property Office as the third pillar of the infrastructure. These are really, really fundamental elements of our market infrastructure. So working in the last few years to build trust in the transition from our pre-Brexit to post-Brexit environment through the creation of a designated standards system that could carry forward the idea that standards can be used to provide a presumption of conformity in the UK, compatible with our trading standards arrangements, compatible with our market infrastructure, has been really fundamental. And Richard Sanders has been mentioned already, but the excellent work that Bays has done working with my team on the designated standards system has been a really critical part of smoothing that transition into our new political situation. And looking ahead, we can see new and exciting work in that area as well. The introduction of artificial intelligence technologies into the UK is no longer, frankly, in the hands of the European Commission. It's up to us to decide how artificial intelligence technologies will be deployed and used by consumers and industry in the UK. So the concept of an artificial intelligence assurance ecosystem that brings trust to that market is really very important indeed. And to those of you, I'll just digress for a second to illustrate the problem. Those of you who thought that standards were just about products, think about the idea of the doorbell. You go to a supermarket and you buy a doorbell. In the old days, it just went like ping pong, you know, and then it had a camera on it, and then it's got a camera with an app on it, and then it's got a camera with an app that is using some form of facial recognition that is being updated overnight that you don't know about, and neither does the manufacturer who sold you the doorbell. So now you're into a very interesting new type of product, which is itself self-learning. It's not just being updated, and you could track when the software was updated and recheck it was compliant. It's actually learning itself. So there's a very interesting challenge around the introduction of AI technologies in the concept of products and services and digital economy, which we need to build trust into through standards. And we talked earlier about consumers. We talked about the vital role that we play in terms of protecting consumers, providing a structure that consumers can rely upon, that trading standards can use, that government can depend upon, and the work of the Button Batteries PAS 7055, which was a really exemplar in that space. And also in supply chains, another excellent PAS 7050 on supply chains is really fundamental. When we think about the idea of trust in organizations, one of the workshop sessions this afternoon on PAS 808 on purposeful organizations is another really exciting piece of work that I hope we will take into ISO and see as an international standard. From organizations to industry and COP27, I came back from Sharm el-Sheikh late on Friday night. My plane was late because Biden chose to land at precisely the same moment that my plane was taking off, and I've had plenty of excuses for late planes, but never because Air Force One was going right past the window, but that was quite exciting. I've heard different views, but I have to say that seen from the perspective of industry associations and national commitments, I thought that there was a vibrant atmosphere, actually, a lot of commitment now to transition. Last year in Glasgow, it was kind of will we, won't we, targets, science, environment. This year it's about just transition. And it's just transition in both senses of the word, and our speaker this morning actually used exactly that phrase. It's like just and fair transition, and just get on with it. And how do we do it? So from a standards perspective, we have to really get there fast, because the world is crying out for support on the transition pathway. How can you create a social, environmental governance pathway, an ESG pathway, for organizations that will help them work out their glide path to their future state, not just themselves, but within their own supply chain. And I think this is a really, really important piece of work. We were very excited to launch the Workshop Agreement 42 on the Net Zero Guidelines, which Susan mentioned again this morning. That was an initiative which started at COP26, where we were trying to say in that apolitical, neutral way, do you know what, there isn't a common definition of the terms that underpin net zero at a subplanetary level. There is no document that does that. Well, there is now. And we facilitated that set of guidelines. This is one of the few printing copies, by the way. But you can download this off the ISO website using the International Workshop Agreement process in ISO. This was delivered by our team in BSI, and I mean, huge hats off to them, Emily Faint and Dan Barlow in particular, for leading that piece of work, and the excellent technical authors from Oxford who helped us with that. But that work, within 3 months, attracted over 1,000, I think 1,200 people to participate in a workshop-led process which generated this document on the 13th of September. And that was an amazing achievement. Over 70% of those people in the production of this document, the workshop process, were new to the ISO system. They were new. They'd never participated in the system that you know so well. And I must say, as I read this, do you know what? This is the only document you need. Please take it. Please read it. Please give it to everybody you possibly can, because journalists, politicians, industry, family, children, it just sets out in very calm, simple language what all the terms mean and what we need to do. It doesn't tell you, of course, how to do it. That's the transition pathway we need to deliver next. So I think that your participation in all of this is really vital, and it's moving at an incredible pace. So I again offer my thanks to you for coming today. We've also perhaps done our best to build trust in the developing countries. It's not just about us and the other Group 1 nations. This is a huge transition for the world. So supporting the developing countries to join the global digital economy and participate in that process is really critical to building trust in us as part of an international system. We are not BSI alone. We are BSI working with 166 other countries. And many of them are not nearly as fortunate as we are in the UK to have the level of influence and impact that we can achieve. But they aspire to do that. And they're trying to learn how to use standards more effectively in their countries to support their industry, to join a global economy, to boost trade and innovation, to protect their consumers, and to support the reform of their regulatory frameworks. And the Commonwealth Standards Network, which was launched in 2018, a BSI initiative launched by the then Prime Minister at the CHOGM that was held in London, has gone from strength to strength. Indeed, I don't know how you probably remember this from comments about King Charles, but as King Charles is now head of state for 2.6 billion people, there were comments then about the size of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is actually growing, and two French countries, formerly French countries, have joined. I think the number is 56 countries now in the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth Standards Network is something that we really want to build upon as a mechanism of sharing the good news about standards and the trust that they bring with a wide range of countries. So we work very closely, of course, with Canada, Australia, and increasingly with India, but particularly with the African nations in supporting that. And last week, David was in Ghana launching the Standards Partnership, which is an initiative that the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office has taken to build on the work of the Commonwealth Standards Network. So very exciting to see the CSN morphing into a standards partnership. And I'd also call out the digitalization toolkit that we have developed for developing countries to support them in their transition into the digital economy. And that's been a very exciting piece of work as well. So really, the big change for me is the transition from not just products, electrical engineering, construction, civil engineering, and facilities management, but towards people, social justice, governance, anti-bribery, for example, modern slavery. It's been mentioned several times today. Your work in the UK, you are looked upon as leaders, thought leaders, in the shaping of best practices for standards that will produce a better life for people, not just protecting consumers, but supporting organisations to be better employers and to protect and support the development of their employees. So that whole piece around social standards is something where I believe the UK has a particular burden of responsibility to step up and to take the leadership in that area. There is no other country that can do it, but it is very clear from Al Gore downwards in Sharm el-Sheikh last week that just transition and social justice is what everybody desperately wants in this troubled time. So as we try to see standards being used for good, to build trust and to share and transition, this is the ambition that we have.